Okay, welcome everybody. Today is 11/16/2020. It is 3:02 p.m. and this is the Lincoln County Board of Commissioners meeting. All three commissioners are here virtually. So I see Commissioner Hunt and Commissioner Hall and myself. So we have a quorum of all three commissioners. First up is the adoption of our consent calendar. These are items of a routine nature that either commissioners or staff can pull for further discussion or information. So I'll ask Casey or Chrissy to just kind of slowly scroll through that so everybody can see. And there was one information that I just wanted to bring up and talk about, and that is item H3, Resolution 10/16/11, relating to the use of force by Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. My understanding is we already have a use of force policy, but we had to do some updates or something. So I was hoping maybe Sheriff Landers could kind of weigh in on what exactly was changed and why exactly those changes came about.
Sure. This is Curtis Landers again, Lincoln County Sheriff. I don't believe anything was changed. We really incorporated our current policies, which met the description of this language that needed to be included in for a grant that was being submitted on behalf of some COVID funds, I believe. And Janet or Council Belmont may be able to step in and talk more about that, or Assistant Council Herbage, but it was basically just to acknowledge that we did have policies in place, that we don't use excessive force, we don't use force for nonviolent protests, this type of thing, and we include the policies that we have for that in that resolution, and it was just basically, I think, more of a certification that we had that in place, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct, and this was done in relation to a specific grant application. This is not a specific requirement we've actually seen in previous applications. Was part of what was required for this particular funding. And again, as the sheriff indicated, it doesn't change anything that we're actually doing. It reinforces the fact that we do have an excessive use policy. Thank you.
And what type of grant or what activity was that grant funding that they would ask for this? It's just a little unusual, I guess.
This is Janet. This was for a small business development grant for $150,000 for, I believe it was from Business Oregon.
Okay. All right, is there any other questions commissioners have on either that item or other items in the consent calendar?
Madam Chair, not on that item, but there's an item about budget updates to the 2021 budget. Just wanted to make sure, are these, sometimes we make significant adjustments, other times they're kind of rather routine bookkeeping type adjustments, and could we get a sense from someone maybe whether or not this is, what the nature of these are, at least in general?
These are fairly routine adjustments that we make from year to year. This year, really more than previous years, because we've had to cover some things in terms of expenses we've undertaken, for instance, for COVID response. For other things, we had to get appropriate appropriation authority to recognize those particular changes. And this is for the 2021 fiscal year. And so these are fairly routine kinds of things that we do on an annual basis.
Thank you.
The only thing is Doug. The only thing I'd add is, as Wayne indicated, the bulk of these really relate to revenue that we've received, but of course we have to appropriate it in order to enable us to spend it. So I have a question on a separate one. I thought there was an email addressing the amendment, the grant agreement. Hold on, I've lost my Where is it? Okay, I guess I have an old agenda that I printed off, but, the amendment between, Olalla Center and Lincoln County's been removed, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I see 3 items on my old copy. That was under execution. That's why I was confused. My apologies. I'm done.
Okay.
I'll move for approval of the consent calendar as presented.
All right. I will second that. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Thank you. All right, next up on a report, and this is a pretty lengthy part of our agenda today, but first report is Echo Mountain Complex Fire. Update, I know I have a few things to report there as well, but Wayne, would you like to start?
Sure. I think we have several things to talk about related to the fire. And I'm going to let you, Commissioner Jacobson, you have actually more details than I do, talk a little bit about decisions that were made with Red Cross concerning housing of people who are currently provided with temporary housing. I think there's some good news on that front. Second item that I think we can update a little bit on is a housing mission, which was granted for Lincoln County. And frankly, I'm fogged enough right now. I'm not sure if we actually discussed that at the last meeting or if that's come since that time. But we do have an approved housing mission for Lincoln County, which is an effort to provide direct housing assistance from FEMA to folks who were impacted by the fire. And I know we have some more details on that. I think it's very important for us to note that we had some people who had not yet signed up for FEMA benefits, and there's still an opportunity to do so. We learned today that there was a 2-week extension of the time frame in which people can sign up for benefits. So I think that's very important. What I'd like to focus on in the absence of Paul Seitz, our solid waste district manager, and Roy Kenyon, they were unable to make it today though, is we got some incredibly good news, I think, on the front of the debris cleanup activities for the area that was impacted by the fire. And the basic great news we got was that what we're calling phase 2 or step 2 of that cleanup, beyond just the household hazardous waste, which had previously been approved, has now found a home and will be approved. So the state has agreed through FEMA to undertake the approval of cleanup for wildfire debris, which includes concrete pads, burned vehicles, hazardous trees, and, as I learned, a removal of soil on properties that were impacted by the fire. So we just got a bunch of information just prior to the meeting about that step 2, about who's eligible for that, what they can expect in terms of the time frame, how they sign up for this removal process, and what that will actually entail in terms of bringing contractors on board. And I thought it was really important to note that at the end of this whole process, what the property owner will receive is actually a certification of the cleanup, which will go a long ways towards efforts for rebuilding or replacing homes on those properties, and when it comes time to sell the property. So a lot more information to be forwarded. We got some talking points from the DEQ ODOT managed process from the state, and we'll be sharing that with the community and with the board coming up. But that's really good news to hear that that was actually approved.
Madam Chair, could I ask one question related to what Mr. Belmont just reported regarding? Yeah, thank you. Regarding people needing to sign up, Wayne, so even if people have already signed up, signed a right of entry form, they will need to sign up again if they want to be included in the phase 2 cleanup. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, actually, when the people originally signed up, there were 2 forms provided for right-of-way entry. One actually only related to the household hazardous waste. The second one, which most of the people signed, luckily, related to removal of any waste there. So those who had signed that second right of entry will not have to sign another one of those, and they'll be included in the notifications that are going to occur for scheduling up the actual removal process. It's important to note too, I found out that if you have not signed up for FEMA assistance, you don't have to have signed up for FEMA assistance to actually take advantage of the debris removal. So you can sign up just for the debris removal. That's what you want. So it's a really broad scope of services are going to be providing for the community out there. And really, I think is a safe and environmentally efficient way to clean up these properties to really get them back into shape so they can be redeveloped.
One more question, if I could. You know, you said this is still evolving, and you mentioned timeframes, but you know, it's interesting, especially in a situation like this. You know, how rumors fly in to fill information vacuums, and I keep hearing from people, oh, it's going to take FEMA months to get here. Well, they've already been here, and it looks like largely completed, if not totally completed, phase 1 cleanup. Do we have any rough sense at all of what the time frame might be for them getting underway with this second phase?
They do. They talked about actually beginning the cleanup in December. And then they said the time frame, and this is statewide. And remember, there's a lot of properties involved, not just in the county, but thousands across the state of Oregon that are going to be participating in this. And they said probably anywhere between 6 to 18 months to get the complete cleanup statewide. So nothing specific to Lincoln County at this time. You just have to stay tuned. But they did talk about getting started in that the debris removal process in December of this year.
Thank you.
Wayne, do we have any updates? And I know that Public Works could not be here today. Do we have any updates on the slide mitigation work that happened this weekend? I know there are several partners, including Solid Waste and Timber Unity and Climate 360, that were involved in that effort. And do we have some updates on how that went, and if there's more work needed to be done, or if the goals were accomplished?
Well, I don't have any direct knowledge about that. I have not had an opportunity to talk to Paul Seitz or Roy Kenyon. What I have heard anecdotally was that because, as everybody knows, this weekend was incredibly bad weather, the kind of weather we're trying to actually put these measures in in place for. And so I think that there was not quite as large a turnout of volunteers as they had hoped and anticipated because of the weather. I know they got some things accomplished out there, and they've got additional materials that are on site and available for folks, including things like hay bales and that they can utilize for erosion control measures. But I don't have a complete report, and we'll get that from Paul Seitz when he gets back into the office.
Yeah, I'll reach out to Paul as well. All right, Doug or Commissioner Hunt, anything for Wayne or questions for Wayne on that topic?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Wayne, any other thing on the Echo Mountain fire that you would like to report or update us on?
No, but I'm hoping you update us a little bit on the Red Cross and the housing mission, those two elements.
Yes. Last week, Red Cross was scheduled to do what they call hotel consolidation, which is basically moving people from hotel rooms into other hotels to kind of consolidate where people are at in the community that are being sheltered in hotels to try to ease kind of the logistical burden a little bit on Red Cross. Many of these people have been in those hotels since the initial fire, so those hotels are home for them. And talking with our resource navigator, Bethany Grace Howe, who has been working with us through the Lala Center to help with fire survivors, and also talking to Red Cross and people at the state, I really felt like there was no good reason to be consolidating hotels with people that have already been through a lot. And then additionally, 12/31, so just coming up here around the corner, when Red Cross is no longer doing group sheltering, those people will likely have to move anyways, as well as people that now would qualify for FEMA direct housing would need to move. And so it just seemed like this was just moving people because that's what was planned to do. When it's just kind of more trauma, more logistical burden on getting everybody moved. Many people didn't have cars and vehicles to do that stuff, where we have an impending move coming up. So And working with Representative Gomberg and Senator Roblin and also Senator-elect Anderson, we were kind of able to circle the wagons and speak to both Red Cross and the state. Red Cross was kind of saying the state was making them do that. The state was saying it was a Red Cross decision, so there was a disconnect. But regardless, we were able to get a pause in place, so nobody was moved. People stayed in the hotels that they were currently in. This will allow us also to focus more on the upcoming transition, both into FEMA housing, but also people that did not qualify for FEMA housing, kind of what happens next. And so we'll be circling back with the Oregon Office of Emergency Management and others this week to really effectively use that pause that we have to really make sure that the next transition we're doing with these folks is one that's thoughtful and that hopefully has some permanency, or at least interim permanency involved instead of just moving kind of to move. So just want to let everyone know what happened there. And thanks to everyone that kind of helped work. I'm sure the two of you were also behind the scenes and that one as well, and trying to make that work for people. As for the housing mission, I too have kind of lost track, but I think that was approved after our meeting last week. So we now are direct housing mission approved, and that basically means that FEMA provides the housing directly. A lot of people think that means trailers, and it can mean trailers, but it doesn't only mean trailers. So they're looking at a variety of options, including doing direct leases with property owners, and also doing kind of a fixed lease where they find maybe underutilized multifamily properties that maybe don't have people living in them currently because they need repairs. FEMA actually pays for those repairs, and then does an 18-month lease with them. So they're looking at those options, as well as things like utilizing summer camps and potential sites for manufactured homes or trailers. So really looking at all kinds of options. We do know that there is about 67 households that do qualify potentially for that direct housing mission. We know from other Oregon wildfire affected communities that not everybody chooses to go through that path. Some people opt for the indirect route, or maybe they find housing themselves, and then FEMA helps them pay for that cost rather than doing directly with FEMA. So there's been no word yet on what exactly FEMA is doing and what kinds of housing, or if they're putting trailers. I do know that they're working on that and having conversations both with us, but also with other government entities and even some private owners, kind of soliciting different options. So hopefully we will hear back soon. And then in addition, they will be notifying those people that would qualify. And if they so choose, they would go through kind of an interview process to start really establishing what kinds of housing needs they have. Is there mobility things that need to be considered? Is there transportation issues that need to be considered? Is there pets? Is there kids? Those kinds of things that they would need to basically find appropriate housing for them. So that's kind of what I know, at least on that end. But I suspect in the next couple weeks or so, we'll hear more about what exactly the plan is for Lincoln County. All right, any questions for me from either of you?
No question. Let me just say thank you and great job of advocacy there, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I guess one last thing I will say is, as far as the turnkey project for wildfire affected communities, which is basically putting money from the e-board for communities to potentially purchase hotels for wildfire affected individuals, and then for other affected individuals after that. We do have a local nonprofit that is going after that grant. I'm not going to say a whole lot because it is a competitive process. You don't just simply get a hotel. It is a weighted competitive process for applications. So maybe I'm a little superstitious, but I don't want to say a whole lot and kind of be publicly giving away what's in that proposal before it is submitted. But we do have a proposal from the area moving forward.
So Chair Jacobson, if I may, just to clarify, the grant or the application is for a grant for money to purchase a hotel, motel, not to get ownership of one. Is that not correct?
The way that the request for proposals was written, coming from the Oregon Community Foundation, is you make a request for a purchase, and then they work with you on identifying a potential property, and you as the entity going after that, or however you configure your application. Some people have multiple parties working together, but you actually would make that purchase. It would be your hotel that you would own. And so the nonprofit going after this in this community would own it and operate it. In other communities, there's configurations of how they're doing that in their proposal.
Could I jump in? And I want to respect, Madam Chair, your desire not to say too much, but last week there was a webinar with Oregon Community Foundation representative, their lead person on this project, and several commissioners, and I participated in that. And the way the grant is specifically written, the grant request for proposals is that it allows and in fact encourages collaborative applications. And at least in my conversations with, one thing that OCF did specifically say in the application is if you do have a local government partner, it strengthens the application. So at least, and this is amazing. I mean, things either happen at a glacial pace or a lightning pace. The request for applications dropped at like 6 o'clock Friday night and has to be submitted to Oregon Community Foundation by 5 p.m. on Wednesday the 25th. But at least my understanding is the model we would be looking at is the county would be part of the consortium applying, but more in terms of being a service partner and working to coordinate, especially as it transitions from fire housing to other kinds of housing, that we would have programs like at least potentially community justice, behavioral health, at the table as potential service providers, along with a whole raft of other government and nonprofit providers. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, the way that what I know, and things change rapidly, as you said, because that proposal came out and then has to be due, is that the county would not be the owner operator, it would be the nonprofit, but we have numerous services like behavioral mental health, community justice, and others that, they would work together on the things they already do, but that would be a new partner for them, a new place potentially to refer clients for housing. And that sort of thing. There's also certain opportunities that we have occasionally where we have money to house people for certain reasons, or we get grants to stabilize people with mental health issues or what have you. But oftentimes we cannot find the housing to actually execute that. So this would be an opportunity for county programming to, perhaps have a partner there for increased housing, but we would not be a direct owner or operator. But this would simply give our clients and a lot of our employees a different partner to work with. All right, Wayne, anything else from you on wildfire stuff?
Nothing more on wildfire.
Okay. All right, moving on then to Lincoln County Public Health COVID-19 update. Certainly a lot has happened since our meeting on last Monday. I think I'd like to first go over our data dashboard and look at that and see if we have any questions, etc. And then I would like to talk about the governor's 2-week pause that was announced last week and chat about this. But first I would like to go over our dashboard. So I don't see Florence today, so it looks like it's Rebecca Austin.
It is me. So thank you, everyone. This is Rebecca Austin, the Health Department Director. And if you would indulge me just for a minute, Commissioner Jacobson, I would like to just put everything from our county in perspective with the larger look of what's going on around the country. because it is startling and our data doesn't necessarily show that. So I did want to just give everybody the information that we have about 11.2 million cases throughout the United States with 246,000 deaths. And on November 15th, Sunday, we had 135,000 new cases. So that is pretty dramatic information. And then at the state level, we're seeing something similar, where we are up to now 57,646 positive cases with 765 deaths total. So I just wanted to sort of relay that, because when you look at our data, we look like we're kind of hanging in there, especially with our mass testing. So I would like to go over this and kind of then talk a little bit about our mass testing, because you're going to see some results from that already. So we are still kind of holding our own on new cases. For the last 2 weeks, you can see we are up a little bit. And then on the purple one, you can see that we do have more cases, and about half of those so far, half of the 21 are attributable to our mass testing. And the testing happens last week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We tested over 1,100 people, which is an awesome number. And we will be getting, we have already started to get some results back, but we're going to give it, throughout the rest of this week as they kind of trickle in. So the number of new cases you can see on the bar graph there is starting to pick up. We've been very low for several weeks now. And now we're up this last 2 weeks, or last week, we're up to 16. And then if we can go, is the testing one next? Or the demographics? Yeah, it's not a lot of changes there, but the testing one, I think, is what I'd like to draw your attention to, because our testing has been going down over the last really 2 or 3 months. So when we got the opportunity from the state to do a mass testing, we thought that would be a great chance for us to do some surveillance and see if there's some COVID cases that are sort of under the surface, and that we could definitely hop on and get them quarantined and follow up with all the contacts. So that is why that's why we took on this mass testing. It was a great opportunity for us, and it looks like the community also thought it was a great opportunity for them. And even though our numbers were 1,100, which is really great, 1,100 people got tested, I know there are a lot of people that went and checked out the lines, even got in the lines, but then decided they didn't have the time or patience, whatever, to wait in those lines. So I think we could have done a lot more testing than we actually did. So it's great that the community was supportive of that, and we are now trying to figure out how we can continue to support people that are asymptomatic or have concerns because they've traveled or they want to travel or whatever, can get some testing done in our county. So we're kind of working on that project right now. But you can see that our testing numbers have definitely leapt up there, kind of with our summer. And we're getting a few positive cases, which is really good news. I know that makes people nervous, but for us in public health, we want those cases because we want to get those people quarantined and put a lid on this. And also to remind you, because I know that a lot of questions are coming up about the schools. So we have to stay below 5% positivity rate. And maybe you could go to the school metrics one next so people can see. So we have to stay below 5%, which means just for our mass testing, we have to stay below 55 cases. So you can see here where the county case rate per 100,000 people is, for the last 14 days, is right on the cusp of the green and the yellow. And the yellow really marks a period of time to see if we can turn things around before we have to reduce how school is being taught. So it's kind of like that, you know, are you going to go through the light or you're going to stop? Period. So we are right at that cusp, and we knew that would probably happen with our uptick in testing and in positive cases. But you can still see that our positivity rate is well within the realm we need to be. So once that dial, what says 2.0, once that gets to the yellow, then we'll be at 5%. So we have a ways to go with our positivity rate. So I'm kind of excited about that. And I just want to remind people, because there is quite a bit of anxiety out there about sending kids back to school. Just want to remind you that the science is showing us that if our positivity rate and rate of transmission for the disease is low in a community, that there is no sign that opening schools will increase that number. So that's really important to hang on to that. So that's why we are really looking at the positivity rate closely. And that's why I think this testing was so important, to really give us a flavor for what's going on in our community as far as how many people are positive out there that don't even realize it. And let's see, is there anything else you wanted to go over with on the data?
Sorry, I was muted there. I think we skipped demographics. Can we look at that?
Yeah, we can go back to demographics and yeah, they don't change a lot. I would say what the 18 to 49-year-old is continues to be where we're seeing most of our cases. And I think it's important to note in the state, I haven't done this figuring out for the county, but in the state data, the 20 to 49-year-olds constitute 55% of all the COVID cases, but they're only 37% of the population. So again, it's another reminder that that age group is pretty high risk. And it kind of makes sense because they're also the ones that are our essential workers. They may be out in the world being exposed more, and they also may be the ones that are having the party still. So that's one thing when we talk more about the freeze, we want to definitely nip the parties in the bud.
Thank you. We obviously have a lot more to talk about when it comes to COVID, but does anyone have any questions about the data before we move on to kind of the pause piece? Commissioner Hong, questions about data?
Yes, thank you. So do we have, I should be more conversant, but do we capture now in the new dashboard, the reflection of the contract tracing to show point of origin? And specifically what I'm thinking about here, is with our mini uptick, I'm hearing an echo. Is anybody else hearing an echo?
I hear it as well.
Okay, so if somebody could perhaps mute themselves or turn it, we're getting an echo. Anyway, because, several messages have dropped into my inbox, and I imagine my colleagues as well, that when they saw, 10 new cases on Saturday, people have been startled because they've been used to, 0, 1, 2, 3 new cases, and an immediate people calling for us to shut down short-term lodging again. But I know we've discussed this previously. We haven't addressed it in a long time. But have we had even one case confirmed as a visitor being the point of origin? And is that captured somewhere in these dashboards?
Are you asking me, have we been able to identify a traveler that tested positive?
Yes.
No, we actually haven't been able to do that. I think we were talking about this a lot in the summer, and for whatever reason, we don't have the capacity. I think it's because we're a very decentralized system here in Oregon. All the county data is kept in the county, so there's not a lot of sharing. So the only time we ever found out that somebody was visiting us who became positive was when they actually called up the health department and said, hey, I just got home from my visiting Lincoln County and I'm testing positive and here's where I stay. So that's the only time we've ever known of a case that was here and could have spread it. But we don't have that capability in Oregon to know that on a regular basis. So the answer to your question is no.
Okay, could I follow up on that just briefly? Again, a conversation I had with one constituent who, pointed out that it seemed like our real decline in new cases seemed to almost exactly correlate with getting past Labor Day, which is kind of the traditional end of the summer visitor season. And so they were arguing, well, that has to prove that visitors or travelers were one of our big sources of spread. Excuse me. And I said, correlation is not necessarily causation, and also has already been noted in this discussion, our testing rate has been very low for several weeks as well. So I don't know if it's really possible to draw a definitive conclusion that travelers are or are not responsible for any significant spread. Is that, is my layperson's read of that accurate, would you say?
Well, I would tend to agree with that. I mean, we know that our spike happened not necessarily because of travelers, but because of workforce. And that's where we got hit hard. And then, it spread to families and to friends. And so that's really where our numbers were showing big spikes. So it's hard to say exactly. I know I agree with you. Correlation does not equal causation. So we're, and I also, on the same hand, I like the fact that there's a traveler's advisory now in this freeze period, that people can kind of settle down, stay put for a while, especially to get us through this holiday. Because I do like to remind us that we're all in this together. It doesn't really matter where we live. If Multnomah County is having cases and they're just free to keep coming to the beach, we're probably going to inherit some of those cases, no doubt. They're going to leave that behind. So, I like that, just stay home. I mean, that's when we did our best work in Oregon, when everybody was staying home, or the best we could in the early days. So I totally am not into relaxing things right now. Not at all.
Thank
Sorry, I
you.
muted myself. Commissioner Hunt, do you have questions about the data before we get into the pause discussion?
I have some comments and questions, yes. And I guess I'll start off where Director Austin finished. Regardless of where the cases are coming, we need to continue to do what we've been doing, because what we have been doing has been keeping our percentage of positive cases low. And as you, I think, know, I track this data daily, and I can tell you that for the week that ended the 7th of November, which was a Saturday, there were 211 cases, and we had, tests, and we had five cases. For the week that just ended November 14th, this past Saturday, we had 638 tests, i.e. 3 times the number. And if I do my math quickly here, we had 18 cases. So percentage of positives for that first week were 2.3. Percentage of positives for this most recent week were 2.7. Again, well within the parameters. And in fact, the last time that we had a weekly positive rate higher than 5% or higher was the week that ended on Saturday, August 22nd. So, you know, what we have been doing has been effective, and what we need to do is continue doing what we've been doing. So, and I think, again, hopefully with the increase in testing, if the percentage of positives stays in the 2 to 3% range, which it has so far, I think that'll speak very highly as to the efforts of our public health department to control the spread. It'll speak highly of our guests and our residents in the activities that limit the spread, wearing a mask, washing our hands, social distancing. So again, we need to keep doing what we've been doing. But I do have a question for Director Austin, and not to put you on the spot, but you know, education is extremely important to me. And I've read some articles that lately indicate that bringing, particularly like K-12 or the younger elementary students back into school has not shown an increase in the spread of the virus, but in fact, you know, going to restaurants, going to bars, eating where you don't wear a mask, and those type of activities have been demonstrated to be a source of increased cases. Your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. That's what we're seeing. And I think even the governor spoke about that on Friday, that we have got to nip the parties in the bud. That is what's really hurting us right now. So yes, I would agree.
So said differently, kids, particularly the younger kids going back to school, really isn't contributing to the spread of the virus, i.e., let's get our kids in school where they learn, which is critical to their future success.
Right, and the schools have pretty strict rules around how they do that, how they bring kids back into the classroom. So, you know, as long as we're following those, I think we're in good shape. I think getting kids back in school, and this has been something we've been talking about as long as I can remember, maybe since early September. Get those kids back in school, and let's you know, mind our P's and Q's. We know what the rules are. Don't have those parties. And now, you know, certainly the freeze is definitely having an impact on that, when you can only have a gathering of 6 people and from no more than 2 households. That pretty much nips things in the bud for sure.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I will say one more thing before we move on to talking about the freezes. My family and I did participate in the mass testing that was done. We actually participated in Wildfire, and it was a really super nasty day, so I felt very bad for all of the people out there working. Yeah, it was a little bit of a wait, but great opportunity to get testing. Everyone was very friendly. The test was painless. My kids could even do it themselves. So just a nice opportunity, and just a big thank you, both to our department and the partners in OHA for helping us do that. And the results came back super quick too, just in a couple days. So that was nice. So thank you. And I hope that we continue to think about how we can offer testing like that to our community and to people that are, you know, not showing symptoms on an ongoing basis. I think it's just really important on how we go forward in this. So thanks. With that, Wayne, can you kind of give us, I think everyone probably knows, I think the cat is out of the bag about the announcement that came down Friday, but Wayne, can you kind of give us kind of a 10,000 foot view of what exactly dropped late last week?
Sure. What the governor announced was actually what she's calling a statewide and it's a statewide 2-week freeze. So this applies across the entire state, no difference between counties, as has been the approach up until this point. So this impacts all of us as Oregonians. And the new measures really do a variety of things. And I'll try and go through these fairly quickly. The first and foremost, as we talked about social gathering, it limits the indoor and outdoor social gatherings to no more than 6 people total from no more than 2 households. That's item number 1. For faith-based organizations, there's a maximum of 25 people indoors or 50 people outdoors. It limits eating and drinking establishments to takeout and delivery only. So we've been moving back into actual service inside and outside, but that's going to stop for the next 2 weeks. It closes gyms and fitness organizations. It closes indoor recreation facilities, museums, entertainment activities, and indoor pools and sports outlets. Zoos, gardens, aquariums, outdoor entertainment activities, and outdoor pools are closed. For grocery stores and pharmacies, there's a maximum 75% capacity that can be allowed at any one time, and they're encouraging curbside pickup. Retail stores and retail malls, both indoor and outdoor, are also limited to 75% of their maximum capacity, with pickup being encouraged, curbside pickup being encouraged. Really, any venue that hosts any kind of indoor or outdoor events is being closed for the 2 weeks. This requires businesses to mandate work from home to the greatest extent possible. That's the language used, and closes offices to the public. And then finally, it prohibits indoor visiting in long-term care facilities, but outdoor visitation is allowed. So that's the specific terms. We have not actually seen the governor's executive order or OHA guidance around this. That hasn't been dropped yet. But we've been monitoring both the governor's website and the Oregon Health Authority website to see if we're going to get some further guidance. But again, that has not been issued yet. Internally, we've got some things that the county needs to be doing, both in terms to respond to this specific 2-week freeze, but also the temporary rules are now permanent for or OSHA in terms of what we need to do in our workplace. So we've been developing some policies and procedures to deal with that. And just generally what we are proposing to do in terms of our own facilities here is to go back to where we were before for the next 2 weeks, starting on Wednesday through, I think it's December 3rd. And that would be to close down the courthouse and other public facilities with some limited exceptions. And that includes transit, obviously our health and human services activities, and the courts. But otherwise, we would be closing down to the public for that 2-week period. The courts, I do know, are the presiding judge is meeting with other presiding judges and the Oregon Judicial Department tomorrow to see what other impacts there might be on schedules for court activities. The way that we are proposing an amendment in our order is to leave the scheduling of the court's activities to the courts. They're going to determine where they go, and it'll be their responsibility then to get that information out to their the people who participate in their activities and to the public related to the courts. I am going to be discussing this order and hopefully the guidance that comes out in the next day or two with other communities in the county, including all the city managers in the county, to see how we're all uniformly looking at this across the county. And we'll be able to report back to you if there's any additional information or changes in terms of what we're going to be doing related to this order.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, a question for Mr. Belmont related to what he just was talking about, if I could. I recall this was an issue back in March when we did a very similar shutdown. You've mentioned transit, HHS, and the courts. But what about the clerk's office for recording documents? That I know that was an issue for some people, and I believe we did make provisions to allow people to come in to do that because those things have to continue on a timely basis. Any guidance or plans?
We will discuss with the clerk, and we can't go back to what we did then. And what we did there is that there are certain organizations, title companies, and so forth that actually do record a lot of documents for people, and we can make arrangements with them, meeting appropriate social distancing, mask wearing, those kinds of things, for them to go ahead and get those recordings done in a timely fashion. And we can't actually make that available to people can make appointments with the clerk's office and continue that particular activity. That's something that we control pretty closely, so that's not just the general public walking into the facility.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I feel like there's several things we need to kind of talk about as a board. I feel the first thing I want to get into is, Wayne, you kind of already brought this up, but it's in terms of our own organization and buildings and our own activities. As a county, it sounds like you're already, putting together some plans for that. Is there anything you need discussion with the board on in regards to that, or action?
Yeah, I think we do, and I know that Krista Yule's on the call today in the meeting, and she's actually been preparing a couple of orders that will accomplish what we need to do. So, Kristen, do you want to weigh in for a minute?
Sure. Yeah. So the personnel amendment that you signed earlier, and this is regarding the COVID tracing. So that was implemented today. It will be ratified at next week's meeting. Do you have any questions regarding that?
And just for clarification, that's an OSHA requirement as an employer, that we have to have that particular policy in place.
Right. So if we have an employee that comes up positive, it would be our responsibility to do the contact tracing. And so personnel is actually taking that on.
All right, is there any other, besides that, is there any other, business related to the county as an entity in terms of this 2-week pause that we need to discuss and take action on today?
I think, Kristen, why don't you go ahead and talk about the amendment to the freeze order that we had previously put in place?
Sure. So we currently have the freeze that you just discussed. So the changes that are going to apply to the county are just for the courthouse, we're going to be closed to the public. So we were doing appointments. So we're no longer going to be doing that. We're going to have people access services through email, phone services, any kind of alternative. And I think Mr. Belmont spoke that we're not going to disrupt services for transit and also for the health department. So those will continue. Do you have any questions regarding county services? Okay.
No, it's very similar to what we had to do back in March, so.
Yeah.
So Kristen, this is Rebecca Austin. Can I just clarify, it wasn't about the last thing you talked about, but about the contact tracing. Are you telling me that if we get an employee that is positive, that we will go through personnel to find out who all the contacts are?
So OSHA is requiring the county to put in place a process for employees to be notified. So our responsibility is, if we have an employee that is positive and they notify their manager and then notify personnel, personnel is required to notify employees who have had contact with that individual. So they will have to do contact tracing purposes for that, which would be an investigation of who that person had contact with. So there's rules. It has to be within, as you know, Rebecca, a total of more than 15 minutes and then within 6 feet of that individual. So OSHA is requiring us as an employer to notify people if they have had contact with somebody who is positive.
Okay.
Great. Commissioner Hunt, you have a question.
Well, I guess I'm confused. I'm part of government, and government's confusing, so I guess it goes hand in hand. But if I can kind of follow up on what I think Director Austin was getting to, and this is directed to Council Yule, do we have to have a policy in place that basically says personnel is the contact point for people that are COVID, or does the law say that personnel must do the contact tracing and follow-up, which clearly would be done more efficiently and effectively by representatives of public health?
So the policy that we just put in place has personnel as the contact. Just because this is typically for this type of work, and I'm not talking about contact tracing, but employee confidentiality, they would typically handle something like that. So when they go out on leave, they're going to notify personnel. They don't typically notify the health department when they use like a COVID leave. And so it would be, I assume, just because it might be, I guess, a double investigation, the health department contact tracers are already going to be doing contact tracing when somebody notifies that they are positive. So that would probably be done already. But personnel would have to do some kind of preliminary investigation to make sure they have, I guess, fulfilled the responsibility of notifying coworkers or other individuals at the county that they've had contact with this person. So that's not public health's responsibility. That would be, the county's responsibility coming from personnel. Does that make sense?
Okay. Well, that's helpful to me. I'm trying to read Director Austin's face.
I mean, the key here is notification of somebody who, I guess, when you do have a positive in a workplace, that was the whole point of this OSHA rule, is that we don't have these people, not realizing that you have somebody who's positive that you've had contact with. So that was the whole point. Also being mindful of confidentiality. So
I think that's the key. I mean, clearly, confidentiality is critical, and I sense that the personnel department will work with public health, and we'll muddle through. So that's all the questions I have.
And Kristen, can I ask another follow-up to that? So a lot of times when we do have outbreaks at workplaces, we do work with the personnel departments, and sometimes that includes having mass testing happen in that workplace. Is there some kind of clause for that to happen, or at what point we might consider that, or are you just leaving that up to public health to help the personnel department decide if that should happen?
So OSHA didn't get into details of how the contact tracing and testing works with follow-up. I think the main point of this rule was just notification for individuals who would have had contact with someone who's now positive COVID. So as far as like the details of process and procedure, I don't see those changing. I think, your process in place that you have for contact tracing and how you've been working with businesses and offices, I think that would remain in place. I don't see that changing at all.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Commissioner Hall. Council, anything else in terms of, things we need to discuss or talk about in regard to the county and the 2-week freeze?
Nothing specific with the 2-week freeze. Just a reminder that a few weeks ago, Oregon Health Authority did come out and say that face shields and gaiters are no longer acceptable. I know Mr. Miller sent out notice that, she gone?
Sorry, trying to minimize noise. Yes.
That's okay. I'm having the same issues here too. So I know Mr. Miller sent out a notice a few weeks ago, just reiterating that gaiters and face shields are no longer acceptable, and that masks really are the only acceptable face covering. So we will have to amend our formal policy to reflect that. But I think it might be worth just for you guys to note, to let employees know that that is something that is going to be implemented and enforced, and everybody should just be wearing face masks, no gaiters, no face shields.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Commissioner Hunter Hall, in terms of the internal stuff? Okay. All right, so moving on, I guess the other thing I'd maybe like, and we've kind of tiptoed into this, but I believe, I think it was Friday afternoon, there was a call with commissioners and the governor. I was unable to attend. I think Commissioner Hunt might have attended in my absence. And I guess one of the things I would maybe like to understand, and maybe there was some clarity provided in that meeting, and as Commissioner Hall alluded to earlier, my inbox is blowing up. I'm sure everyone else is too, on, why is this a statewide pause, and why is it not county by county? Why is Lincoln included in this? And I was just hoping there might have been some clarity provided in that call, or maybe there's some information that the two of you had on kind of the decision, or the, I know Dr. Seidlinger also was weighing in on that, so I guess I would like just to know what you know.
Madam Chair, if I may, although there were two commissioners on that call, I was not visible through video, and I listened only. So I did not participate, although I was present. But I think that's important from a disclosure, public law, quorum situation. But again, I listened. That's all I did.
I did ask a question of Dr. Seidlinger, which addressed this very point. I said, you know, even though that call was only about 3 hours after the governor's announcement, 2 or 3 hours, and, you know, I said, this is going to be, I think, tough for a lot of people in Lincoln County to accept, especially because our case rate has been so exceptionally low over the last couple of months. And, you know, can you share with us any kind of justification as to why? And, you know, I know Director Austin is multitasking, but I may put her on the spot, but ask her if she would want to weigh in after I relay what Dr. Seidlinger said, and if there's any further amplification. You know, he alluded back to what the governor said in the early going, that the number one metric she was going to be guided by in terms of loosening or tightening restrictions was hospital capacity. And, you know, he said, you got to think in terms of a statewide system that, yeah, for instance, our two hospitals here in Lincoln County might not be overwhelmed, but Portland Metro is getting hit very hard. I believe there was a news item over the weekend that OHSU is saying, you know, they're approaching capacity, and to a lesser extent, the Southern Oregon hospitals are being slammed as you know, as well. And that our local hospitals here, you know, they can handle, I guess, what would be considered routine cases, but the really serious, really complicated ones, you know, the normal practice is to ship them off to the larger metro hospitals that do have capacity to better manage those cases. And so if the metro hospitals have to put up the sorry full sign, then yeah, we've got a problem. And that was his primary justification for them doing this statewide as opposed to in selected counties. And, you know, I was just wondering if Director Austin would want to reflect on that, amplify it, or, you know, again, from a data policy standpoint, why it makes sense to do this statewide rather than selectively.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Commissioner. And I think some of you may have heard Dr. Ogden from our Samaritan hospitals here in Lincoln County talk on OPB's show on Thursday, Talk Out Loud, about just how vulnerable we are in these rural communities and how quickly we can become overwhelmed. So I think this was mostly put in place because of that reason, that we don't want to have to start rationing care. And we have to remember that we have more than just COVID patients coming into our hospitals. We have a lot of other people that are very sick for unrelated reasons. So we have to, you know, stay on top of this for sure. And then the other thing I would say, and why I support, you know, sort of a statewide approach, I support a nationwide support or lockdown, to tell you the truth, because we're all in this together, and our boundaries are very fluid across this country, you know. And so I just think if we're going to get our arms around this, we need to really buckle down. And I really appreciate the fact that our governor has taken that move. And same with our neighbors, at least the north and south neighbors have taken similar moves. They're in lockstep, except for I heard that Washington is doing it for 4 weeks instead of 2. So we may be looking at a longer period of time, or some counties being in a longer freeze than others.
Thank you. I appreciate the information being shared from that meeting, and kind of understanding the the bigger picture here of how that decision was made in hospital capacity, which is my greatest fear in all of this, is that we end up being like a lot of other communities we've seen both in the United States and across the world with, people dying in the streets. That I want to avoid that at every cost. So thank you for sharing that.
Chair Jacobson, if I might just comment, and again, all I did was listen, so these comments are not related to the governor's call, but I think they provide further insight. I do remember there was a time when Lincoln County was concerned because we had a couple of COVID cases. We had an outbreak, and I believe we actually transported a COVID patient to Corvallis out of concern of hospital capacity. So it's not as remote as it might seem. And second of all, while Lincoln County, I think we would consider ourselves somewhat remote, there are very remote counties that are experiencing very rapid growth and spread of the virus. So again, I think that puts some perspective on, as Director Austin said, we're all in this together. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Okay. Jumping into lodging, I assume that the both of you have, again, had your inboxes kind of exploded with and I think we got some public comment as well, some comments about, are we going to shut lodging down like we did previously, or, yes, shut lodging down, or no, don't shut lodging down. So I do feel like we ought to have a discussion about that. I do know that last Friday when all of this dropped, Council Belmont actually copied me on an email to Dr. Seidlinger, kind of asking is there going to be guidance provided for lodging, especially with these travel restrictions that are coming in place. And I think the response was simply, I'm not sure, and I'll forward this on to the governor's office. Wayne, have you received any other correspondence in regards to lodging?
We have not, and actually, I think if anything is going to happen there, it's going to be as part of the governor's executive order and or the OHA guidance that we're expecting any time now. And actually, as we've been sitting here, I refreshed the pages from the governor's webpage and the Oregon Health Authority webpage to see if anything has been dropped. At this point, nothing is there yet. So I think that to this point, there has been no specific guidance around lodging. I think probably the response will be something to the effect that they have already made the statement they want to make here, and that is that social gatherings are limited to no more than 6 people total from no more than 2 households. And that applies whether you're a private home, your own home, or renting a place. I think that's probably what they're going to tell us, but I'm not sure.
So, Madam Chair, could I follow up on that? Maybe I'm jumping 2 steps ahead, but the question that then immediately pops into my mind is, say, that's the guidance along with the restriction on out-of-state travelers. I think a lot of people will be asking, and actually some are already asking, what capacity do we have to meaningfully enforce it? I mean, I've kept one eye on my inbox periodically during the meeting, and I see a resident sent to us, and I should, add that a picture of 3 out-of-state vehicles that just arrived this afternoon at a vacation rental down the street from her, which, on the surface is, would apparently be in violation of the interstate travel restrictions. But again, is there enforcement capability, and is there really enforcement teeth around that? I see Sheriff Landers turned his camera on, and then maybe just kind of the larger issue of, I'm having, even though I think these restrictions are right and necessary, I mean, I don't think our deputies or city police really have the capacity to turn into full-time party patrol. So I don't know if the sheriff would want to weigh in here.
Sure, if you'd like.
Sure.
Thanks, commissioners. Yeah, I can tell you a couple of things on this that The executive committees for the State Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs Association, and leadership from the Oregon State Police met this morning. I'm on the executive committee for the State Sheriff's Association, so I listened to that conversation. We are, as a group, trying to plan and draft a consistent message put out to the public regarding enforcement and how that can be obtained. I know that given these restrictions, the terms Thanksgiving police have already come out, and others which I really don't want to be labeled as the Thanksgiving police moving forward. But I think that the message, and it's still just in draft form, but I can kind of tell you the direction it's going. We would like to still do education first. We still think that's the one way to try to gain compliance with the order is through education, not just going out trying to see how many people we can cite. Obviously, as Commissioner Hall pointed out, we can't go door to door to see and count how many people are at the Thanksgiving table and how many households are there. It's just not feasible with the resources we have to do it, and it doesn't really prioritize correctly with everything else that goes on. However, if we see basically outrageous or egregious violations, then we agree that that's the time to start taking enforcement action, trying to correct this. I think Director Austin put it well, and it's actually in this draft. It says, after all, we're all in this together, and we need to work on getting out of it. We also know that we can't cite or arrest out of a pandemic. We know that that's not possible. We can't put that all on law enforcement and enforcement to make that happen. But we also understand where the governor's going with this and why she's putting these executive orders in place. And we want to be able to try to accomplish that enforcement piece as much as possible. With that, we do want to continue what we were doing back in May. And if anybody has violations, we recommend if workplace or business violations that they contact Oregon OSHA first. Restaurant or bars, they may contact OSHA or Oregon Liquor Control Commission. Really look at those licensing authorities to regulate them appropriately. And we still follow up. We don't want our dispatch centers to get inundated with calls of like, I know there's more than 6 people at the house. That's just not going to be helpful. But if there's a large party, something going on that's very flagrant, then we will respond and take action. I mean, it's as the enforcement piece of this, we feel the responsibility is there, and we need to do that. We want to work together with everyone involved, the public, to try to accomplish these goals. I also know, talking about the travel, and maybe Council Belmont or one of the other council can weigh in, but it's my understanding that the out-of-state travel is only a recommendation at this time. So technically maybe not enforceable. I don't know. I know that's one thing that came up under discussion today. I also know, going back to as far as workplace, what am I going to do? I have essential employees that need to come to work. What am I going to do if an employee goes out of state for Thanksgiving and comes back? Am I going to make them take their own personal time before they come back to work? I think those are some discussions we need to handle internally, maybe at the county Zen team, or maybe we want to do it here today. I think that's a big question that I'm facing with my own agency, and I know others probably around the county that have those essential employees that have to come on site, that can't quarantine working from home, that is going to have to address with the Thanksgiving weekend coming up, and to see what we can do with that. So yeah, I know those are a couple of points that I'm still unclear on, that we need to get some clarification on.
This is Council Belmont. Let me clarify the issue around the travel advisory, and that's exactly what it is, an advisory. So Oregon joined in with Washington and California to issue the advisory, and this is what it actually indicates that they provide. The travel advisories urge against non-essential out-of-state travel. They ask people to self-quarantine for 14 days after arriving from another state or country, and encourage residents to stay local. So this is not an order. It's not an enforceable order. It's, again, an advisory that was adopted on a regional basis by Oregon, Washington, and California.
Thank you for that. I think the other part of it, too, that we talked about is the entire executive order isn't even out yet, as you mentioned. I know that our associations talked to the governor's office this morning. Maybe somebody has more information, but it could be as late as Wednesday morning before we actually see the full executive order. There could be additional things that we need to consider in there also.
I'm going to make a suggestion here. I might suggest to staff that maybe we tentatively pencil in some type of BOC meeting for later on this week, maybe Thursday or something, in case when that executive order drops, there's things we're not anticipating or things we need to discuss or what have you. Wouldn't be the first time that something comes out and surprises us. Certainly for this year, it's not the first time that would happen. So if the other two commissioners are on board with a thumbs up or a head nod, maybe we can just pencil something in if we don't need it, and that would be okay. I see a thumbs up from Commissioner Hall. Commissioner Hunt, would you be all right with that?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm okay. I think all three of us are fairly busy this week with the AOC conference, but if it's necessary, I'm sure we can find a time.
Okay, yeah, just a placeholder for now in case there's something surprising that comes out. I think if it's just most of what we have already discussed today, we would be all right, but it's possible something comes in there that we were not anticipating. Okay, going back to my kind of list here, one thing I was hoping we could discuss back to lodging is I was talking with Commissioner Yamamoto, a colleague from Tillamook County, before this meeting. They have used their vacation rental list and basically sent out a letter just making sure that all of the owners and managers were aware of the current 6 people, 2 household gathering rule. And I thought that might be a prudent thing for us to do as well with our vacation rental list. Didn't have time to send it to staff to look at that, but hoping maybe we can get some type of consensus or something to send out something like that.
I would certainly support that. And, even though some properties are still individually managed, even if we get word to the management companies, because, sometime tomorrow at least, since this does take effect on Wednesday, and I know this is going to be a headache for them because I'm sure that some of them have booked larger groups, but make them aware that this is the governor's directive and that we encourage compliance.
Yeah. Commissioner Hunt?
I guess I would just ask the sheriff if staff have adequate time to do that, since, I guess it doesn't matter when the letters go out, but the sooner they go out, the better, since the governor's executive order is effective day after tomorrow.
Well, if email is okay with the 3 of you, we can probably do an email message to get it out quicker. And one advantage of having all licensing is we have all the emails, and so I know Lisa's on the call, and I imagine we can send that out. We can word something up and send it out.
Okay. I do have the letter that Tillamook County sent out, and they did it via email as well. So I can forward that on to you, and that would probably work fairly well. I think just a few minor changes, of course, but I think mostly it would convey what we needed to. So I will send that out as soon as our meeting is over.
Thank you.
Okay, I think last thing is on my list in terms of the freeze. Just before the freeze, we had to send some money back to business organs for grants and support for small businesses because the state decided not to waive a bunch of requirements on that money. So we had to send it back because we couldn't, there wasn't enough businesses to apply that met all these criteria. Given now that we're looking at a 2-week freeze, I am hoping that we can jointly send a letter basically telling the state again that they need to release all of those previous criteria. And those criteria were if you had applied for money previously, you couldn't apply for this. If you had gotten TRT money, you couldn't apply for this. I'm hoping that we can encourage them to waive those requirements and send us back our money and hopefully get that out. I'm so confident that if they did that quickly, we could still get that out by the end of the year. there may be a consensus that we work on a letter?
Long as Council Belmont's comfortable, from the legal and risk standpoints, I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that as well.
We'll work on the letter for you.
Great, thank you. And in a lot of regards, we can just use the letter we've used previously telling them to waive requirements, but now obviously bring into the context of businesses, having to close or modify yet again. So I think that's all of my list sort of that I had on the pause. Commissioner Hall, anything else maybe on your list for the pause that you wanted to discuss?
Let me look at my notes. I think we may have covered everything, but I don't think so. I think, I think all my questions have been answered. Thank you. At least as far as they can be answered at this moment.
Okay, Commissioner Hunt?
Yes, as Commissioner Hall's already stated, and I think you've acknowledged too, Chair Jacobson, the rules are changing, and I'm sure there'll be new information. And so I think we'll continue to be nimble. And again, I think from my standpoint, you talk about the pause, the freeze, whatever you want to call it. I kind of think of it as going back to where we were. Before, I think, frankly, before we came into phase 2, a lot of those procedures are going to be the same. So, no, I have no more questions at this point.
Okay. Council Belmont, anything you wanted to add or need to talk about in regards to the freeze?
Yes, just one last thing, and that is that I appreciate what you were suggesting that we do and will undertake to give notification to short-term rental owners in terms of the requirements, but also we have a full team that continues to meet on COVID on a weekly basis that in our joint information center, and these are partners and our own folks that get out the public information related to this. So we'll make sure that they continue with providing the public with the latest updated information so that things like the limitation on 6 persons and 2 households applies not just to short-term rentals, but applies to all of us too. And so we'll make sure that information is shared widely.
Great, thank you, Council Belmont. Director Austin, anything else from you on the 2-week pause, freeze?
So Commissioner, just looking over my notes, and this isn't necessarily about the 2-week freeze, but I do want to say one more thing that I haven't got a chance to say, and that is that over the weekend, Dr. Fauci really tried to tell us that every little mitigating factor that we can put into play during this time right now where things are so bad is going to help. So in other words, if you've got college kids coming home for the holidays, even if you all wear masks in the home for a few days to sort of let things, acclimate, you're doing yourselves a service. So don't ever think that something is not enough. It might not be enough, but it's something. And I thought that was really interesting that Dr. Fauci said, don't let, what is the saying? Don't let perfect get in the way of good. So I think doing our best that we can is worth something.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on.
Commissioners, I'm sorry, there was one thing we didn't do. We didn't actually take official action on the order we prepared to amend orders number 32088 and 620-153 to temporarily close the Lincoln County facilities to the public. So we actually have a draft order to accomplish that. Can we get a motion on that?
I would move for adoption of the proposed order.
I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye. Aye?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, carries. Thank you, Council
Thank you.
Belmont.
And can I
All right,
just
moving
clarify,
down.
that start on Wednesday then, not immediately, is that correct, Council Belmont?
Yes, that begins on Wednesday.
So get information to our staff too then.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to commissioner reports. I feel like I kind of provided all of my reports as we went through these two things. So nothing additionally from me. Commissioner Hunt, anything else to report?
I have a couple of things. Number one, I convened 4 listening sessions on economic development and how the county would like to see it done. Although there were 4 listening sessions that were designated by geographic areas, since they were held virtually, anybody was welcome to participate in any of them, although generally speaking, each of the 4 areas had representatives from their own area. Probably no surprise that the 3 topics that came up, probably in this order: housing, childcare, and broadband. But it was also interesting to note that each of the 4 areas, there were some nuances as to how they'd like to see economic development done and what some of their priorities might be. And I think generally it reflected the more localized economic or demographic factors relative to the different parts of our county. So Frank Burris, who was the moderator of all 4 sessions, is preparing a report, and once that report is available, I'll see that the commissioners get it. And it, I think, can be a tool for us to move forward on how we're going to do economic development, who should do it, and one of the primary areas of discussion was partnerships and financial support. So that those 4 listening sessions were completed, and we'll be receiving a report shortly. And second of all, I also took the COVID test on Friday in Toledo. My wife and I took it, and I received my results on Sunday, and I do not have the virus. I do not want to violate HIPAA and reveal my wife's results, but I will say that I don't have to quarantine. And that's all I have.
Glad to hear that. I will just say one quick thing in response to your report, because you had specifically mentioned broadband. Myself and Rachel Maddox Hughes, who's been working with us since the beginning of COVID, went after a grant a little bit ago with EDA for rural broadband. And we can't say we got the grant yet, but we can say that they basically moved us into the area for further consideration, which is a really good sign. There's kind of more information we need to get them, but it is likely we will end up with the money to further study and hopefully implement some broadband out of that. That's quite exciting.
Madam Chair, I think you're muted again.
Sorry about that, Commissioner Hall.
Yeah, I wasn't going to report, but I believe one thing that I will share, since both of you have disclosed your COVID-free status, I can make it 3 for 3 that we do have a COVID-free board. I didn't participate in the mass test event, but I did last week need to have a routine medical procedure at the hospital in Newport, and as you know, as a precursor to that, a COVID test was a requirement, and happy to report that that I am COVID-free as well. But of course, we'll continue, like the rest of us, to take all the guidelines and precautions quite seriously.
And if I may, I'll point out that for all 3 of us, really all that states is at the time of the test, we were COVID-free. So again, as Commissioner Hall stated, we need to continue to do the things that limit the spread of the virus.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. All right, moving on into discussion information, kind of a long awaited agenda item here, which is our SDR licensing program update. So we have started basically reviewing our SDR licensing program back in 2019. We were getting ready to kind of do a deeper dive in early 2020, and then COVID happened, and then Wildfire happened. And so we're hoping now, you know, knock on wood, that we can kind of reopen that topic and hopefully begin where we left off. But first, Council Belmont is going to start with kind of a review and some update on where some things are, and then we can provide further guidance to him and other staff from there. And likely this will be a conversation that will go over, many meetings and over a period of time. So, Council Belmont, I'll let you start us.
Thank you, Chair Jacobson. And just noting that we spent the first hour and a half of this meeting dealing with wildfire and COVID, and that neither of those things are likely to be resolved anytime in the near future. So they continue to be front and center on our attention and our activities, really on a board level and on a staff level. That being said, it was a chance to really bring you up to date on some of the things that have been happening with our licensing program and really seek some guidance from you as to what our next steps are. We had presented some options. Really, it's been, back in February of 2019, and really haven't had an opportunity to revisit those much since that time. And now is our chance to do that. And so the first thing I want to do is I'm actually going to turn this over to Sheriff Landers and to the civil manager, to Lisa Combs, to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've put in place since the last time we talked. And specifically, we're going to talk about the software program that is in the process of being implemented here for our licensing program. And then the additional resources we now have for code enforcement. And I think James Holm, I hope he's still here, can talk a little bit about the activities he's undertaken since he's come on board with the county. So I do want to note that I have a written memorandum that's in your materials. It's available on the county website. It includes the specific recommendations that I'll talk about a little bit later. But it also is a continuation of the discussions we've been having. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first, I think, to Sheriff Landers, and then after the updates are provided by his office, then I'll come back and talk about some specific recommendations.
Thanks, Council Belmont. I think I'll turn it over to Director Combs first. She's got more of the information and on the software, which I think is important, and any questions you have from her on that. And then I believe James Holmes is also here as the code enforcement for that. So he can tell you about some of the activities that are going on out in the field and bring you up to date on that and the benefit of having him as Ben. So, and I'll kind of fill in some gaps.
Good afternoon. This is Lisa Combs, Support Services Director with the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. So just to recap briefly on the short-term rental program, as of Friday, the current number of active short-term rentals in the unincorporated areas of Lincoln County was 576. So this is down slightly from about 590 active licenses in March when the moratorium did go into effect. It does appear to me, based on the numbers, that most of the owners are renewing their licenses. Although we did have about 17 properties that were sold since March, and the owners did apply for new licensing as allowed under that resolution. Moving on to the Lodging Rev software, we did successfully execute a signed contract on May 13th this year. To date, Lodging Rev has finished their initial property review, which included about 6,000 advertisements in Lincoln County. They weeded out what belonged to incorporated versus unincorporated. In the end, they did provide us with a list of about 114 properties that they thought could potentially be operating unlicensed. Our office took that and conducted further investigation, and we were able to narrow that to approximately 65 properties. So the owners of these properties did receive non-compliance notices from our office in October. And of those 65, there's only about 31 remaining that we're still actively investigating and doing follow-up on. All the others have complied with code, and Lodging Revs will continue to provide monitoring of websites moving forward as part of our service contract. Another component of the contract with Lodging Revs is a 24/7 complaint hotline. and an online reporting form, both of which went live on Monday, October 12th. Our website has been updated to reflect the change and outline a little bit better procedures for handling complaints, kind of the step 1, step 2 process that folks were kind of missing, at least initially. Since going live, we have only had 3 complaints, which tells me, I guess we're rolling out of summer. It's surprising to me. And my hunch is Deputy Holmes plays a role in this. 2 were operating without a license and 1 was parking, and that's the extent. Not unexpectedly, most of the complaints we're currently receiving in our office have to do with the 65 non-compliance notices that we sent out. Those owners calling in either unaware that there was a short-term rental code now in Chapter 4 and that they had to get a license. Some of them thought that they had the transient room tax account, and so they'd done everything they needed to do. And unfortunately, timing is bad because they got on our radar, they got non-compliance letters, and now they're trying to comply, and we're in a moratorium, and they can't. So that piece of it does exacerbate their frustration, and it has made for quite a lot of unhappy contacts in our office, unfortunately. The last component of our contract with Lodging Revs is the online owner registration portal, and we expect that to go live on November 23rd. We're doing training tomorrow, and if all goes well, we should have that started Monday, which is huge. It's the biggest piece. It's our owners being able to get online to manage their properties, do their renewals, do their payments, see where they're at on the status of their renewals, and they will get copies of their licensing there. So we are looking forward to having that up and running. Once that is running a little smoother, we do plan to post a list of all active licensees on our website for public access. I know that Newport is doing this, and I think it saves them a lot of time. And after talking with Council Belmont, it sounds like we will look at reviewing some mapping and maybe other data analysis options once this piece of the software is running smoothly and we've had a chance to audit the data for correctness. So that's kind of Lodging Revs in a nutshell as far as where we're at now. And as Council Belmont mentioned, Community Services Deputy James Holmes started on the 13th. He's currently working Sunday through Wednesday. He conducts all the on-site renewal inspections, responds to complaints, and handles our enforcement. And we had kind of a long agenda, so I'm going to wrap my update up. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
No questions right now. Let's go ahead and have James present, and then from there we can see if there's questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is James Holmes. I am the Community Services Deputy appointed to the STR program. Since coming on in July, my role has primarily been to work with the short-term rental program in order to gain compliance with properties, kind of divided into 2 segments, one being the inspection portion, the other being violations. Overall, inspections do take up the vast majority of the time, which has actually been fantastic because we have seen a great reduction in violations over this period. A large portion of my job has also been really getting to know some of the more high-density STR communities and build some relationships with the long-term and full-time residents there, as well as the management companies, which I'd like to, in some small way, believe has helped us to reduce some of the STR complaints that we've received. That is my 30-second blurb of who I am and what I do.
Maybe just a couple of gaps I can fill in from myself, maybe a little bit what I think we're hoping to get from the three commissioners today. Couple of things that specifically I think our staff would like to know is maybe where the commissioners sit, and you don't have to say right now. I know that Council Belmont has a really good update that he's going to provide here in a second, but what your philosophy is on enforcement. And while I know that we have the discretion to take action and what we do, but I would really like to hear from the board on what their feelings are as far as that direction and where we'd like to go. I mean, discretion is not just something that we use loosely. It's not something that it's just whether or not we pick or choose whether or not to issue a citation. There's a lot of there's government interest involved. There's as far as whether or not education is working, whether enforcement should be a last resort, these type of things I really would like to hear from you. The other part of it too, I think if you heard Director Combs talk, we have probably a small sampling of unlicensed homes out there that want to get licensed. Some of them were actually paying tax, thought that was only step for whatever reason that they didn't know they needed to obtain a license. I know that some of them were out there absolutely violating the statute that they knew, and I know that citations are going out for those individuals already. So when you look at the moratorium and whether or not to extend, maybe some consideration too to opening it for a short period of time, maybe even 1 week if you're going to extend. I'm not sure where you're going with that. To get some of these other places, these homes that were already operating, an opportunity to submit an application and go through the process. I know that Deputy Holmes has some time that he can put into there as far as inspecting the home, getting it all ready, and moving forward with that. And it would fill in nicely with what we're doing, and then close it down again unless you're not going to open it up altogether. So just some opinions on that I have on that. And if you have any other questions after Council Belmont's presentation, we're definitely here to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Council Belmont.
All right, commissioners. And so I appreciate that update on the new resources that we do have available to us and the resources that we can utilize with the program on a go-forward basis. And I appreciate the comments of the sheriff in terms of the direction we're seeking from staff. It really ties into some of the specific recommendations for program changes and amendments to our code that we're presenting to you today. And I want to note that these are simply staff recommendations right now. This is not, we're not asking you to make final decisions on any of this. We will actually have to take the next steps will be to actually draft appropriate amendments to the code for these particular changes, give you options if you would like options on these things. But it's really just a general direction of where we would turn our attention in the near future related to this particular program. That's what we're seeking. I also want to note, because I think this question has come up, we do have a suspension of new licenses in place that runs through the end of this calendar year. That's December 31st. My hope is that actually if you give us direction on these particular recommendations we are here, is that we'll actually have some proposed changes to you before the end of that time frame here, before the end of the calendar year. It may necessitate, however, that you consider extending that suspension for a period of time, depending on what you direct us to do. So I just want to leave that out there. That's something that's on the table we can discuss further. We don't have to take any action on that particular issue today, but we are very cognizant of the time frames there. So that being said, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Belmont, just Madam Chair, a procedural question or suggestion. I know that we all received Mr. Belmont's memo earlier today, and it does have a long list of recommendations and suggestions. And I'm wondering, just in terms of, I think it would be easier for me. I don't know how you feel if that as he works down point by point, that maybe we see if we can have consensus or direction on a per item basis, as opposed to going through the whole thing and then having to backtrack through this long list of items.
Thanks, Commissioner Hall. The way I was going to proceed here is similar to that. I was going to, after Wayne kind of provided the general update along with Sheriff Landers and others from the Sheriff's Office, I was going to have him kind of briefly take us through those various items on that memo that was sent out, and just kind of a simple either consensus or thumbs up on, you know, if that's a particular topic we would like to come back to and see a possible amendment or draft order of something. And from there, I think we'll get a sense of what it is the board wants to look further at and what we don't want to look further at. And we can also then start, you know, taking on those issues kind of one at a time or a few at a time, and you know, kind of plan out how we move forward through this process. So that's how I was planning on proceeding today. Wayne, anything you want to add from just a procedural perspective?
No, and actually one of the things I was going to suggest, if you felt more comfortable, since you're getting, I mean, you've seen most of this stuff before in one shape or form. If you felt more comfortable, what we could do is come back next week and put this as an item in which you actually give us, you know, direction, specific direction on these items. If you wanted to wait until next week, I would love to have the board give us some direction today, if you can, so that we can get started on a number of these things. But really, it's up to you.
I am okay with at least giving a you know, if we're interested and not on, you know, hearing more about a particular topic, if the other two board members are agreeable that I don't think we need to dig into all the details today, but if we can simply kind of look at the list and say, yeah, I'd like to hear more about that and see a draft order, I think that might be helpful for staff. Is there a consensus to do that today?
I'm willing to do that.
That works for me.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right, so
And I'm going to work a little bit backwards here, because I'm going to talk about one of the recommendations that's at the end of the memorandum first, and that is the element of public involvement and public output. We know that during this time of COVID, we are not holding face-to-face meetings. That's just not something that's being done by a lot of governmental entities. So it's been somewhat of a challenge to provide mechanisms for folks to provide input to us. I know that we've worked and put together links in the Board of Commissioners website that includes what they call a smart sheet, which is a great way for people to actually make their comments to you. They can make them in a lot of detail, and we've received a lot of detailed comments here. And I want to note that we will continue to seek that public input throughout this process until you make your final decision. So I want to just stress that point first, that there will be opportunities for additional. There is a second thing that I just feel like I can't not address this. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the room here, and that is that there are some efforts underway by groups to really take their own lead in terms of what they want to see done around regulations of STRs. So there is an initiative petition that has been circulating with a draft ordinance that would regulate STRs in a much different fashion than we do now. I just want to make it eminently clear, because I can do so now, offer my legal opinion that I think that particular form of approach to the STR regulation is fraught with legal issues. I think it will lead to litigation, and I think it'll expose the county to potential risks, including financial risks, if that is the direction in which the voters decide to go here. So I need to be really upfront with that particular comment on my legal opinion about that particular ordinance. The county was not involved in crafting that. In fact, I have spoken at least to one attorney who represents the petitioners who was not involved in crafting it, and expressed my concerns, my real deep concerns with the manner in which that particular action is going forward. So I think that's enough said. This is not a comment on any of the policy decisions that are being advocated there, but on the manner in which they're being proposed.
So Chair Jacobson, if I might, Council Belmont, would it be fair to say that the county has addressed the VRDs as a business licensing, a business issue, and that the proposed possible ballot initiative would change that to land use issues?
That's a very simple answer for a very complex issue, but yes.
And just if I could, Madam Chair, Mr. Belmont, I think kind of the unspoken suggestion in your presentation and our discussion is, A, we don't know if this measure will qualify for the ballot or not. B, we don't know what the voters' verdict on it will be if it qualifies. So in the meantime, I think it's incumbent on us to continue with this process of updating and refining and hopefully strengthening the current licensing and enforcement system.
I agree with Commissioner Hall on that. My thoughts exactly.
All right,
That's
we've gotten that by the side. So let's talk about the specific recommendations now for
If we could pause real quickly, Wayne, I just want to make sure that we do have a consensus for the first thing Wayne talked about, which was some type of virtual public platform or a workshop or that kind of thing. And I assume we would. Okay. Keep going, Wayne.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. The next specific recommendation that I'd like to bring to you is around septic systems on STRs. And as you recall, and I don't have all the figures off the top of my head, but my recollection is only about a quarter of the licensed STRs are actually on municipal or public sewer systems. The rest are on septic systems or alternatives to septic individual systems for the properties. And we have seen that and heard from our experts internally here that there is a different impact on septic systems in an STR use, a more intense impact on those particular systems than there is in what I'll call the normal kind of residential situation, either being an owner or renter occupied, long-term renter occupied situation. And so after looking at this, seeing the results of when we did evaluations on a number of systems previously, I think that it really behooves us to look at requiring a review of septic systems through the State Department of Environmental Quality's ESER or Existing System Evaluation Report process for all SDRs that are on septics. And that's the gist of what that recommendation would be. So it won't be just those that we don't have any records for in the county records here, but we need to have that evaluation done. And I think that really does two things for us. One is it does ensure that the systems are properly operated. And if there are issues with those systems, that repairs are made appropriately. But just as importantly, I think, is that these reports can include a provision that provides a capacity determination. What is really the carrying capacity of that system for the number of people, given the type of use that it's going to be put to, for that. And we can utilize that as that carrying capacity as a ceiling on the occupancy for that particular property. We would still have determinations to look at capacity through looking at individual bedrooms. That's the next recommendation we'll talk about here. But this is really the ceiling. If the septic system capacity says you only can have 6 people, but you could have, you have a bedroom capacity to have 8 under the other calculations, the ceiling would be hard. The 6-person capacity determined by the ESER would set the top. If the opposite way, if you doing the calculations we have, it came up with a capacity of 6 people based on the number of bedrooms. But the ER said you could have 8, well, you can have the 6. So it's going to be really the lesser of the two to do that. So we think that's extremely important. I know in my discussions with our folks over in subsurface at the planning department, they think this is really important for us to do. So we'll work on the details of how we would actually put that in play. When it would happen and how frequently it might occur after you've had that initial report done. So that's recommendation number 1. The second recommendation really has to do with, and I think it's in some ways maybe the most important recommendation, and that is determining.
I'm sorry. Can we pause there and see if we have
please.
consensus?
Sure.
Yeah. My thought is I would like to potentially pursue that and see a draft order. So continue to discuss that one. I'm just curious if the other two commissioners, where we're at in terms of that particular issue.
I agree. I would like to see language developed around this for our consideration.
Yeah, I also agree. I think it's important to note that those inspections would be required for all units that are on septic systems, and I'm also interested in how frequently they would be those septic systems will change over time.
Okay, back to you, Council Belmont, on the next topic.
Thank you. The next topic is really a change in the way that we calculate the capacity limits for individual short-term rentals. Right now, we have a per bedroom calculation plus a number of people. So that's the manner in which, and that was something we had looked at some models from other areas. But as we went back and re-examined that capacity limitation calculation, we have actually seen that many jurisdictions have a different calculation methodology and actually have, which results in lesser capacity in each individual STR. But one of the things that we know, at least anecdotally, we hear complaints about are the number of people who end up at any individual STR. And many of our capacity determinations would allow up to, they allow up to 16 people. And there's a number of them with 10, 12, 14 people that are allowed based on the current method by which we determine the occupancy limits. So what we're prepared to do now is to recommend a new maximum capacity. And we're going to have to deal with the 8 or 10 properties that are grandfathered. Whether or not you want to include those or do something there, we'll have to discuss that. That can be a different conversation. But we're looking at actually recommending at this point that you set the maximum capacity as 2 persons per bedroom with no additional. I think that in and of itself, this is the single act that you could take that would lessen possible issues, the issues around parking, around noise, around garbage, by the simple determination that less people means less impact. And so this is not inconsistent with what we've seen in other jurisdictions around the state and even in Lincoln County. Although it's not uniform across Lincoln County right now in terms of what we do. The second element of that, though, is that we have seen in a number of areas that this capacity limitation is not just limited to the overnight. It's an overall capacity for that particular STR, meaning that if you had 3 bedrooms and allowed 2 persons per bedroom, the capacity at any one time in that particular home is 6 people. If you wanted to hold a wedding, wanted to hold some kind of event and bring in another 20 people, but they're all leaving because you're going to have it overnight, well, you couldn't do it at that particular location. You'd have to do it at some other kind of venue to hold your actual event. And so, again, this is something, it's really kind of 2 parts there. One is the 2 person per bedroom limitation, and then making this a cap on the capacity at all times. I would say that I think this will make enforcement easier. We already have capacity limitations, and in my discussions with the sheriff, that's probably one of the hardest things for them to enforce currently is those capacity limitations. But if we simply say, this has a capacity of 6, 8, 10, whatever it might be based on the number of bedrooms, that's a lot easier determination that can be made than what we currently have in place. And I think, again, more than any other action you take, if you direct us to do that, it's going to quell a lot of the impacts that short-term rentals can have on residential neighborhoods. So I'll stop there and take any questions on that one.
I would just say I would like to explore this one as well. I think the kind of simple head count approach would be easier, but I also want to point out that the potential septic situation and increasing requirements also has some language about changing occupancy based on septic capacity, and there's another thing. So those 2 things may intersect, which I think you're aware of, but would be in favor of exploring this as well. Commissioner Hall?
I would like to see some specific language on this. I know this has far-reaching implications, but just on an initial consideration, I think Mr. Belmont's proposal and the reasons behind it probably have merit.
Commissioner Hunt?
Yeah, I support Council Belmont's recommendations as presented.
Okay, Council Belmont, back to you.
Thank you. The next item really kind of relates back to what the sheriff and James Holmes were talking about in terms of, how do we actually enforce any of the actions against and handle complaints that are made against any STR owner, and in a way that recognizes that really many of our short-term rentals are very effectively managed and owned and operated by people who want to be nothing more than good neighbors. And I think part of that is when Lisa Combs was talking about the number of complaints that we've received out there, it really is not a staggering number compared to the number of STRs we have in the county here. So I think we have to keep that in mind. There's and this is part of what the sheriff was asking for in terms of a code compliance philosophy that we need to look at. But I will say this, that based on what I have examined in other jurisdictions on their mechanisms for code compliance, ours is probably the most lenient in terms of getting to the point where you actually would deny somebody a license or revoke an existing license. It takes a long time to get to that particular stage, and we've never actually taken one to that point right now. And I think a lot of it might be due to the fact that we have great code enforcement services out there, and that people do recognize once they get that complaint in there, they need to take care of it. But this is an area that I think we should do some further examination, look at some of the best practices that are being put in place across the state. I don't have a specific, for this particular item, I don't have a specific recommendation as to what that will look like at the end, but I'm really looking for more direction to say, go ahead and examine this particular issue, tweak the existing language, change it wholesale, make some other kind of recommendations, but come back with something that after very thoughtful and careful review of other options here, something that makes it's fair to those who operate the STRs, but also gives an opportunity for people who have legitimate complaints to have an avenue to get those complaints resolved.
Just to share my thoughts on this, I think this is one topic we really need to dive into. It's the system. I don't think it's working super well right now. I think what constitutes a strike is kind of confusing. I also think that somewhere in this, we also need to have that kind of law enforcement, code enforcement philosophy discussion. So I think as there's consensus, bring this back up, that's where we can have that discussion on sort of our philosophy around code enforcement. But I think it's been very confusing on what constitutes a strike and what does not. Additionally, I think it's not just owners that need to be held accountable. I think it's some of the managers and management companies. So I think I would like to sort of see some language developed in that strike capacity or whatever we might move to. But it's not just owners, but also those management companies. Because if there's a noise violation every single Friday and Saturday, and they go over there and it's resolved immediately, clearly that is not actually being resolved. It might be resolved at the matter, but if they're not educating their guests and really being on top of that, then we have a continuous problem. So I think this really needs some work and a deep dive. That's where I'm at. Commissioner Hall.
Madam Chair, I'm with you. And, Sheriff Landers asked earlier about our philosophy. And yeah, this is one of the things here I think we need to do a deep dive on. I think not only in code enforcement through the sheriff's office, but planning enforcement. I think organizationally we've had a longstanding philosophy of education and voluntary compliance rather than immediately coming in and bringing the enforcement hammer down. On the other hand, we are now 4 years into the current licensing and enforcement program, and the fact that we rolled it out with a 3 strikes policy. And it's good to know that most owners and managers have been responsive to complaints, but just on the surface, the fact that unless I'm wrong, we haven't even issued a single strike in those 4 years suggests to me that we have maybe tipped things a little too far on the side of leniency. But this is a delicate balance here, and I'd like to see some suggested language for further discussion.
Commissioner Hunt.
I would agree. I think if you look at the number of complaints that we have all received about short-term rentals, and the fact that, as Commissioner Hall pointed out, nobody's gotten one strike. So obviously something needs to be done, because I find it very hard to believe that with all of the complaints and the seriousness of some of those complaints, not one strike has been incurred by any of the properties. So I support looking at this and frankly tightening it up.
Thank you. And can I just build on a comment that Chair Jacobson said, because I included this really not as an afterthought, but as a footnote in my memorandum, and that is that one of the things we would like to explore is to see, it's not just holding the property owners accountable for the complaints, but also where there's management companies, since so many operators actually have management companies there. And so we'd like to explore that in more detail too, how we can, and as James was saying, actually, he's making some inroads by having discussions with management companies. And I think they would be willing participants in that too. But I'd like to explore that also.
Yeah, I think I saw Commissioner Hunt give a thumbs up as well, and I saw Commissioner Hall shake her head. So I think you have some guidance on that. And I think you have one more.
Oh, I couldn't have one more.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sheriff.
I was just going to say one more on that. It is very confusing. I know that I don't believe we have any strikes. I know it's confusing to neighbors and owners and property managers alike. What does constitute a strike? So I agree with you on that. I think that just in looking at, I don't even know if we need the strike program in there. Maybe, I don't know. It's something. Maybe something else is going to disqualify them or something. I agree. I think it needs a real more working. But the other part I wanted to bring up in this is the fact that I think we also, and I don't remember if Council Belmont included this in the update here, to look at maybe determining who should be that contact. I know initially we wanted an in-county contact, and I think we maybe should look at what if we need to have that, or just look at a 24/7 contact to begin with. That could be an owner that lives outside of the county that maybe manages the property on their own, but it's going to be more responsive that they try to get some answering service locally to address that. And I think we want to make sure we push that to remedy the situation, whatever it is, to the lowest level possible, so that we can just move on so it doesn't even get to that situation. I think that's what the neighbors want. And if they have a contact that's going to go out and immediately, or contact the renters immediately, and rectify whatever the problem is, that's far more valuable than having a property manager company or an answering service to do that. And I think that's important. I know that when we were going through this during the summer, I drove up in some of these areas myself. I talked to a couple neighbors. I talked to one neighbor. I won't mention the area or the location, but they came out and said, we have a short-term rental that's right next to us. We try not to involve law enforcement if all possible. We never have. If whoever rents the house comes over and they're having a little loud, I go over and talk to them myself and say, hey, you're a little loud, I'm trying to sleep. They usually turn it down and things are good. It's kind of going back to that, being neighborly again, regardless of who your neighbor is, even if it's a short-term time. So just my thoughts on that too.
Okay. Council Belmont, I think there's one more item to discuss.
There's actually two more, but let me talk about the second one first, because it's much shorter. And that is that we still want to look at some of these alternative STR situations, the larger companies like Airbnb and Vacasa that are running things, in terms of how they actually fit into the scheme here. We also need to look at some of the more unusual rental arrangements, such as renting a room, see whether or not that should be regulated or not regulated. That's really kind of more of a long-term thing. So I'm going to put that really kind of this, before the most important one, I think that we need some guidance for you, which is the last one. So any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll just share my thoughts. I do think we need to at least look at some of those other, kind of models of the room rental, and again, all of these being over 30 days. But I would say that before we add more code and add existing things to potentially regulate, I feel like we need to get the core of what we're already doing kind of fixed a little bit. So I guess I'm feeling like I would like to see draft language on all the guidance we already gave you today on SDRs, kind of get things hopefully sewed up or working a little better, and then maybe address that. That's how I'm feeling. Commissioner Hunt.
I think if we're addressing the issues of STRs, VRDs, we ought to do the whole thing. So if we're going to be making changes, I think we ought to address these nuances or alternative rental properties at the same time.
Okay, Commissioner Hall.
You're muted, Commissioner Hall.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. That's my feeling as well. I mean, if we're going to do this, rather than just string it out, we've already unfortunately and ended up really off our original timeline. Let's do it right now and just get it done.
Okay. All right, and the last one.
The last one, last but not least, is you have put in place right now a temporary suspension of licenses in discussion on whether or not you want to place a cap on the number of licenses that are available in the unincorporated areas of the county. Most of the cities, if not all the cities, at least I'm aware of in Lincoln County that regulate STRs, have some kind of cap in place on the numbers that are allowed, either, and they could be geographically, they could be, some of them already do activities because they can in the land use arena, but that is something that is in place in most jurisdictions, and especially cities around the state. So the question really is, do you want to put a permanent cap in place? And if so, what is the number that we need to set for that cap, which is always going to be fun and interesting to look at. Also, some of the sub-questions are, do you want to include the cap? Do you want to include maybe some geographic area components in? How do we resolve the license transferring? If I'm a current owner that owns a license and I sell my property, am I allowed to transfer the license, or can that person pick up a license within a certain period of time, let's say 60 days, and continue that license? Or does that property then go to the back of the waiting list and come on a waiting list? What is the waiting list? What are its terms and conditions? A whole bunch of things around institution of a cap, that initial decision of, do you want to do some kind of hard cap on the number of licenses? I think is what we're looking for, some kind of direction, and then we can work down the component parts of that.
Thanks, Councilor Belmont. I would say that I would be in favor of exploring a permanent cap of some kind. I can't tell you right now what that number would be in my head. I also would like to look at just a straight cap, some type of area-based cap. And I know that creates some issues for staff and enforcement, but I would at least like to look at that. I'm not saying I necessarily think that's the best option, but I would at least like to explore what that might look like. The other comment I would make is that we've gotten a lot of emails simply just extend and keep extending the temporary moratorium that we have. We never intended this temporary moratorium, or at least I did not intend for this to be in place this long, because it's supposed to be just that, very temporary. And with that in mind, it's not the kind of policy I would use on a long-term basis. And so if we do explore a cap or a hard cap, I would not want to simply just extend this one permanently, but really go back in and do a better look at creating policy that is meant to last a little longer and explore some of the issues you brought up around transferring of licenses and do we have a wait list or not, or whatever. So I would like to explore a cap, area cap, and I'm not a fan of just taking what we have and making it permanent. And Commissioner Hall.
Commissioner Jacobson, I am in concept, I would say, would like to take a look at a cap of some kind, but again, I don't think I'm ready to say what the best approach is. And this is one where I would really like to see staff maybe bring us some range of alternatives to consider. And, overall cap, area cap, one or the other, or both, I'd like to see some language to consider.
Commissioner Hunt.
I'll answer the question with a question. I'll go back to Ms. Combs' comment. There currently are 65 properties that have been determined to be they were captured by the new software system as properties that have been renting but do not have a license, and they're now requesting a license. And I think the sheriff asked about possibly opening the window. I'm opposed to that. As far as I'm concerned, ignorance of the law is no excuse. There was plenty of adequate notice that we were going to a licensing program. And the fact that for whatever reason, these people were unable to or did not become aware or failed to comply, I'm sorry, but at this point, I have no interest in opening the suspension of new licenses. And I hope that prior to the end of the year, we'll have new regulations in place that will make that suspension no longer applicable. So to answer the bigger question, I'm interested in a cap. I'm interested in not only a geographic cap, but possibly zoning, using zoning areas with caps. And I think that, again, I have no interest in opening the opportunity to add to the current 576 VRDs at this time.
Okay, Council Belmont, does that kind of give you the direction that you need in terms of a process and things for you to bring back to us?
Yes, it does. And just maybe a final reminder to folks that they can go to the county website, go to the Board of Commissioners webpage. There is a link on that. And in fact, if you look at my memorandum, I actually link to the site in which you can make comments. We welcome public comments on what you've heard today. And as we go forward and to develop some alternatives for you to consider, again, we will have a pretty robust public participation process and be looking for a lot of public comments to help guide you in making your final decisions.
Okay. So I think we wait a couple weeks. So you want to start coming back, I would imagine?
At this point, it's going to be probably sometime, obviously, after Thanksgiving. So in December.
Commissioner Hunt, was that a hand?
Yeah, that was also an itch. I just wanted to take the opportunity to welcome James Holmes to the county. I hope, James, that if we ever get on a golf course, you're not as good a golfer as the James Holm I worked with at, frankly, Umpqua Bank and Bank of the West. He was a loan officer and he's a pretty doggone good golfer. But having said that, welcome to the county and look forward to seeing you face to face.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hunt. And you have nothing to worry about. I'm a terrible golfer.
All right, we'll get along fine.
All right. Anything else from you, Council Belmont, before we adjourn?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, Commissioner Hunt, anything else? Nope. Commissioner Hall? No. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn. We'll go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Our next Board of Commissioners meeting is Monday, November 23rd, 2020 at 3 p.m. And again, that will be done remote on GoToMeeting. Thanks, everybody.
Just a notation before we sign off that if necessary, we're looking to see what the governor's executive order and the guidance from OHA are on COVID. We may schedule a special meeting. We'll provide appropriate public notice if we do so. We'll look very carefully at your calendars when we do that. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
There may be another meeting this week.
Thank you. Understood.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
This conference is no longer being recorded.